What is up, guys? Well, we've got another month of 2023 in the can, and we're here to talk about all of the movies that I saw in July 2023, of which I managed to see 10 brand new films. One of them is actually a bit of a leftover from June that I honestly just completely forgot to put in that list, so Wrath of Becky, going to throw you in here with the July boys, but I think you're going to hold your own. And with that being said, I already know I'm going to get a handful of comments asking, where's Sound of Freedom? You didn't watch Sound of Freedom? Why isn't Sound of Freedom on this list? Here's the deal. I would have been one of the first people out there to watch and review Sound of Freedom. There's aspects of it that seem really interesting to me, but unfortunately, it seems like the discussion surrounding that movie is not about the movie whatsoever. Either you like the movie and you get accused of being in support of some of the people involved in the film that are conspiracy theorists, and you're a right-winger, although I don't know what left and right-wing has anything to do with child trafficking, but that's a discussion for another day. And if you criticize the movie whatsoever, you get called in support of child grooming, child trafficking, and you're part of the problem. And just, you look, after I've dealt with Nefarious for going on 5 months now, I don't have any desire to have any discussion like that, even though some of you have gone extra lengths to try to make sure. I had somebody track me down on Facebook and tell me,
your refusal to review this movie will not go unnoticed.
So to Luke Gemma and all the other little prick freedom fighters that have that mentality, all I got to say is this.
Remember it. Write it down. Take a picture. I don't give a fuck.
With that being said, guys, let's go ahead and kick this thing off with number 10, the movie that I enjoyed the least in July 2023. And unfortunately, this was a movie that I was actually really curious about, and that was Sympathy For The Devil. Now, this was not a movie that really got a whole lot of advertisement or traction. Didn't really have anybody talking about it. It was only because I saw a few people review it on Twitter that I even realized that it was even out to be seen. I had first familiarized with this movie whenever I was at MegaCon back in March, and we were doing a panel on our most anticipated movies of the year. We wanted to do a blockbuster film, and then we wanted to do a deep cut. And so I started going through all the deep cuts, and this one, all I had to go off of was a picture of Nicolas Cage in like blood red hair doing like a face like that to Joel Kinnaman, who's one of my favorite actors, one of the more underappreciated actors, I would say. So that's really all I had to go off of. And unfortunately, this movie is just, it didn't have enough forward momentum. It didn't have enough meat on its bones to survive beyond Nicolas Cage just doing Nicolas Cage stuff. And look, I love Nicolas Cage, and I think that certain movies really benefit from him, like really leaning into the crazy side of his performances, like even earlier this year with Renfield. I thought that was an absolute blast. Last year, we had The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. That was one of my favorite films of the year, but I kind of want Nicolas Cage to go back to his more serious acting, like from the 90s and stuff, with things like Face Off, and even though it's a very animated performance, Face Off. I just rewatched 8mm a couple of nights ago. Like just one of those more serious Nicolas Cage roles. I'm kind of craving that again. Like him only being there to be crazy, to me, is almost a little cliche.
Sit back down!
And so basically what you have in this movie is you have Joel Kinnaman, who is a seemingly regular dude that goes to the hospital to see the birth of his newest child, and Nicolas Cage gets into his car, holds him at gunpoint, and tells him to drive. And this is going to be a spoiler for those of you that want to walk into this movie completely blind, but I actually think knowing this is going to improve your experience with this movie if you decide to check it out. One of the things that really hurt my experience with this is because of the title and because of the red leather and the hair and just the persona that Nicolas Cage's character is really being in this movie. I thought that it was going to end up being something where he's the devil and everything pointed to that. And there's nothing supernatural like that in this movie whatsoever. So that's kind of on me watching most of this movie with this expectation of where things are going to go. And because of that, when they were much more grounded and simple, it was like, oh, seems like you could have done more with that. Beyond that, I just feel like there wasn't really enough in the first 2 acts of the film to hold my interest, to make some of the reveals and some of the twists in the third act to really have a whole lot of impact. Joel Kinnaman maintains one of those guys that he's awesome. I mean, both of these guys do great to carry this movie. Just not a whole lot to do here with their the material that they're given. But I really do hope that Joel Kinnaman especially starts to find his traction because, I mean, he had the RoboCop remake that not a whole lot of people liked, and he had Suicide Squad that was great, but not a whole lot of people saw, and he just seems to really be struggling to break out, and he's got the talent to be an A-lister in my mind. But yeah, Sympathy for the Devil. Check it out if you like kind of slow burn movies like this, but to me, I've seen better. Coming in at number 9 is going to be Insidious The Red Door, and unfortunately, while I was really pulling for Patrick Wilson to do a really great directorial debut, and I think that he shows a lot of talent with what he does behind the camera, the script that they gave him and the story that they gave him is arguably the least interesting of this entire franchise. I mean, essentially, you spend most of the runtime kind of having two characters trying to rediscover the events of the first two films, predominantly the second film. And if you're a fan of this franchise, you already know everything that they're trying to uncover. And so the movie really fails at having some intriguing answers to the questions that the characters are trying to solve because you already know the answers to them. And so aside from just some classic Insidious style scares and atmosphere, which Patrick Wilson does a good job at bringing that, and you certainly could tell he learned a lot from working with James Wan. Aside from that, you have just not a whole lot of payoff in this movie. And when you finally do get to the third act, when things are starting to ramp up, it's similar characters, similar situations that we saw in previous movies and not nearly as exciting. So this one was a big letdown for me. It had a lot of potential, but overall it just kind of felt like, yeah, there's nothing left to do with the Insidious franchise. What are you doing? And it's made an assload of money, so we're probably going to get another one. Number 8 is going to be Haunted Mansion. Now, I have never seen the Eddie Murphy film, and so I walked into this one just wanting something to take my kids to for the last couple of weeks of summer. And they seemed to enjoy it well enough. You know, they didn't walk out really talking about it a whole lot, so I think it was probably not the most exciting movie that they've seen this summer either. But yeah, this one, I don't know. It's very mediocre. There's not really anything horrible about it, but there's also not anything really exciting or stand out about it. You got some good performances here. Like you got Lakeith in the main role. We've seen him quite a bit popping up over the past few years, and he's really good. His character has a nice kind of a heartwarming story and character arc there that pays off well. I love Rosario Dawson. I love Danny DeVito. Owen Wilson, I don't know. I used to love him back in the day, and it seems like anytime he pops up here recently, it's always kind of awkward. He doesn't have that same kind of charm and energy that he brought to things like Wedding Crashers, in my opinion. But nonetheless, he's fine here. And I did like the style of the ghosts, like the special effects and even the way that they actually brought the mansion to life. It very much is trying to capture the vibe of the ride from Disney, which I've only rode a couple of times, so it's not like I have vivid memories of what they're trying to pay homage to. But overall, it was just kind of a wash, rinse, repeat story of a haunted house, and we've seen it done so many times before, done better. And it wasn't fun enough to merit being like really geared towards kids, but it also wasn't creepy or spooky enough to kind of draw in some of the horror fans or even the adults. So this could have been a really nice like gateway drug movie for getting your kids into horror and kind of dipping their toes into the water. And I just don't feel like there was enough there to even really have that type of experience with it. So it was fine. It was fine. Number 7 is going to be Joyride. Now, this was a movie that I just saw everybody hyping up. Everybody talking about this is the funniest movie I've seen in years, easily the best comedy of the year, and just all over the place. Everybody was talking about how great this thing was. So a couple of weeks after it was released, I took my wife like for a little Sunday day date to go check this thing out. And she enjoyed it a good bit more than I did, and she's the target audience. This is a chick flick overall. Like, there's raunch here, so some guys can get into it, but overall, it's a chick flick, and it worked for her more than it worked for me. Now, in my opinion, while I do think that some of the characters and some of the actresses do a good job here, there's certainly some funny situations. I chuckled a few times, and especially in the back half of the movie, there's some good emotional payoff to some of the movie's message in regards to, like, figuring out where you belong and relationship to your parent, even if you didn't grow up with them and things like that, that can certainly hit home for people that have that experience in their life. I feel like comedy just sucks nowadays. That's about as plainly as I can put it, as blunt as I can put it. Now, this movie tries, and for some people it's going to succeed more than me. I am a hard audience when it comes to comedy, but nowadays I feel like even the more risky and raunchy comedy is safe and predictable to a certain extent. and it's almost like forced to be raunchy, where back in the day, you think of some of the movies that I grew up with, like American Pie and even some of the early Todd Phillips films that were really raunchy, and all that just felt so natural and was just so easily hilarious, where you watch these situations and you watch these ridiculous raunchy scenarios and you just bust out laughing. And I just don't have that experience with raunchy comedies anymore. And I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know if it's the writing. I don't know if it's just being desensitized. I don't know if it's just that raunchy comedy has to obey within a certain parameter nowadays because of how sensitive and PC culture is. So they can't really go too crazy with the jokes or the situations. And it's just, let's just talk about sex a lot, and especially in movies like this where you got groups of female friends. It's almost a cliche at this point where you have a group of 4 people. You have one of them that's super straight-laced. You have one of them that is just absolutely over-the-top raunchy. I mean, we saw this in, like, Girls Trip and even in Bridesmaids to a certain degree. And then by the time you get to Joyride, it's just like, okay, I've seen this scenario before. So this chick's going to talk about dick the entire movie, right? That's the whole shtick.
This is a work trip for me.
Audrey, I got you. Look at me.
You're thinking about a dick.
Damn it, you're right.
Oh.
And that's kind of what it was. So again, I don't mean to talk too down on it. It was a perfectly fine comedy, but I really long for a comedy that's genuinely going to crack me up and make me laugh and make me tell people that have missed comedy the way that I have, you need to go check this out. This just wasn't it. Number 6 is going to be Wrath of Becky. And again, this was a June movie that I watched like the last couple of days of June, and that's why I completely forgot to throw it on my little list. And this is a sequel to Becky, which came out in, I think, 2020 or 2021. It was one of the movies that came out when we were starting to get some VOD releases, when we were all just starving to death for new content, new movies, new shows, because COVID had locked everything down. And this was one of 3 movies that I watched actually in a cabin whenever I was out on vacation with my wife and kids. It was The Lodge, the Rental. Is that the one that was directed by Dave Franco? And then this one, the first one, Becky. And everybody was hyping up Becky as being great, and really all the movies, except for The Lodge that I saw during that early little stint of finally getting new movies after COVID, it felt like people were just so ready for new movies that they were really, really over-forgiving on some of them. And Becky, while was entertaining, it was just like zany, extreme gore, and I was morbidly curious to find out what Kevin James was going to do playing an evil neo-Nazi. It didn't quite measure up to my hopes there. I checked out this sequel purely because Sean William Scott was going to be taking the villainous role. And I love that guy. I love Stifler. Like, he's picked some bad movies, but he's, again, one of those people that I think has always been way more talented than the typecast roles that he's been given since he succeeded with Stifler. And he's just such a nice guy, such a heartwarming guy to listen to when you listen to interviews. He just seems so humble that he's one of those people that I root for. So I wanted to see a villainous role out of him, and I actually think he did significantly better in this movie than Kevin James did in the first film. And I like this movie significantly more than I like the first film. It's still kind of the same thing. You get this crazy chick that is taking vengeance on a group of bad guys, and some nasty scenarios involving their fate ensue. But I felt like this one had a better pace to it. I felt like the payoff was a little better. Again, I liked Sean William Scott's performance more. I actually like the character of Becky more here, where she's more teenage, and it felt a little more palatable to see a psychotic teenager taking revenge versus like the goriest version of Kevin McAllister in the first film. And they ended on some notes that actually has me intrigued for where this might go in the future. So again, not like an outstanding standout movie that I'm going to recommend to everybody or I'm going to remember for this year, but pretty good little improvement over the first film for me. Coming in at number 5, we got one half of Barbenheimer in Barbie. Now, this is a movie that is not made for me. This is not a movie that I probably would have checked out if I didn't have a channel where I reviewed films. You know, maybe a little curiosity, but, you know, do I really need to justify why a 33-year-old man who likes horror and metal didn't want to go check out the Barbie movie? Nonetheless, this is a movie that on its surface you would think is just going to be a very simplistic concept chick flick for, you know, girls, women of all ages to celebrate Barbie and all that. And it's a it's a lot smarter and a lot more creative than that. And that's kind of a double-edged sword, because I thought it was weird that I'm taking my kids to see a Barbie movie and my 6-year-old is just like, and my 10-year-old is like, what's going on here? Like, these are pretty colors, but what are they talking about? I don't get the jokes. And so this is very much like an adult Barbie movie, which is fine, just an odd choice. But what I appreciated about it is that normally a movie like this, I would come here and tell you that it's so heavy-handed and it's preachy that I don't have any interest in it, because those movies lose my interest immediately. No matter what the message is, if you're going to hammer me over the head with it and not do something creative or unique with how you're going to tell me the message, then you just lost me. That's a sermon. That's not a story. And this movie was genuinely creative with what it was trying to say. And if it wasn't for the fact that they, in my opinion, fumbled in like the last 10 to 15 minutes at really bringing home that message in a nice, like, even-keeled way, because throughout the movie, they're exploring Barbie, they're exploring feminism, they're exploring the impact that Barbie had, both good and bad, on women, and they're also exploring Ken and masculinity and the patriarchy. And if you don't actually open your eyes and open your ears to the movie and experience how even-keeled the messaging is throughout most of it, a lot of people walk away and they're like, this is a man-hating movie, when that's really not the message whatsoever. But you end on a note to where it felt like they could have really stuck the landing at having it be a very even-keeled message and a very palatable message for everybody, no matter what gender, sex, and political affiliation and all that. And they kind of decide to go for a little low-hanging fruit joke by the end of it, of telling Ken to kind of stay in his place when it comes to there's a joke about like the Supreme Court, and they're like, no, you're not going to get a Supreme Court chair, but we'll give you some little pointless job below that to feel important. I'm paraphrasing. But that was a weird note to kind of end it on, because it was like, okay, now your message is a little confusing here. And again, I'm not offended by it at all. Like, I still walked out pretty entertained by how creative it was, but it was like, damn, you had to give them ammo, didn't you? You couldn't just bring it home and have it all be even keeled so that we can all walk out and say that was really nice. That was nice and balanced there. But it was a funny movie. It was entertaining. I appreciate the little Matchbox 20 gig in there. That was really fun too. Good performances as well. Margot Robbie's great as Barbie, and Ryan Gosling is great as Ken. A lot of other great side characters as well. But just, yeah, not a movie that I'm like, I'm going to ever rewatch. You know, not a movie that I'm going to go recommend to a bunch of people that didn't already have inherent interest in this. So it was creative. It was creative with the preachiness. It was creative with being very heavy-handed, and that's a little refreshing. Number 4 is the other half, and that is Oppenheimer. Now, if we're going purely off of quality of just filmmaking, this one's probably easily number 1 on this list. But as I said in my review, this is a movie that, aside from the fact that I love movies and I love film and I want to experience as much as possible, plus I have a channel where I need to talk about it, and I'm a big Nolan fan, so I'm always curious to see what he's going to do, even if it's a story or a concept that isn't necessarily up my alley. I'm not a big history guy. And so when I go to see this, I know it's going to be a very talky, dense, 3-hour historical biopic on a subject that is certainly important to understand and is certainly important to discuss, but not necessarily anywhere near the top of my list of things that I really want to go out and spend 3 hours discussing. But beyond all of that, it's Nolan doing what Nolan does, arguably as a director, maybe arguably the best of his career, as far as getting great performances out of his actors, telling a really riveting story that is 99% dialogue, being able to do it all practically and not really succumbing to modern movie making. It's a very classic filmmaking approach, which is important to kind of maintain. And then there's a few filmmakers that are aggressively trying to maintain that, no matter how Hollywood shifts. And I really appreciate the fact that it leaves you, by the end of it, feeling a little less safe in the world that we live in. And, you know, talking about historical events that pretty much everybody knows, but nobody really discusses it beyond just the surface value of, oh yeah, fat man, little boy, Japan. Yeah, I remember. And so it really does make you think, which is the intention of the movie. And that's the intention of Nolan. And so I think that he achieves his goals there. Beyond that, though, there was definitely audio issues, which I've had sporadically with Nolan films ever since The Dark Knight Rises. I don't understand why. Like, if it wasn't just his movies that I had that issue with, I would just assume that my theater just had their speakers wired a little weird. But I had this issue with Dark Knight Rises. I had it with Interstellar. I certainly had it with Tenet. And I had it here to where about a quarter of the dialogue I couldn't quite discern what they were saying. And that sucks when you have a movie that's entirely dialogue and is very dense and very character heavy, where you have to pay attention to certain things because a dude you see for 30 seconds in the first hour of the film comes back 2.5 hours later. And if you're like me, you're like, who the fuck is that? Why is that significant? So again, I have a full review where I go a lot more in depth with this. Very well made movie, just not necessarily my type of movie. Certainly not a movie that I would rewatch beyond just this one experience. Coming in at number 3, the hidden gem of the month, and that is Cobweb. Now, this is a movie that I first kind of got familiarized with a little less than a month ago when I did my video about upcoming horror films for the rest of 2023 and how anticipated I am for them. And Cobweb kind of caught my interest because of the 2 lead actors with Lizzie Kaplan and Anthony Starr, and also the fact that it was produced by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, because I think they're a really solid production team there, and most of what they do is really interesting. So I was curious of what this was going to be. Then the movie released, and nobody could fucking see it because there was like maybe 7 theaters in the U.S. that seemed to carry this damn thing. The nearest theater to me was Jacksonville, and it just takes a lot for me to roll the dice and throw a gamble and drive 2 hours and 15 minutes to go check out a movie that seemingly the Lionsgate didn't have a whole lot of confidence in, because they're releasing it the weekend of Barbenheimer and they're releasing it to select theaters. So I reached out, got a screener, luckily, and checked this thing out, and I was so baffled at why they decided to do that, why they decided to release it now instead of holding on for this for like the September, October season, because this is a great like Halloween season movie, and I really enjoyed this one. Like, there's certain things about the third act and where things go that I didn't feel like completely came to a satisfying close. There was one character throughout the movie, the teacher, that I never really bought into her arc, never really bought into her inserting herself into this situation as much as she did. But beyond that, this was a genuinely creepy movie with some really creepy performances by those 2 lead actors. And it's a movie that, just like Barbarian last year, multiple times I'm like, oh, I know where this is going, and they completely go a different direction. And that's rare for me. As many movies as I've seen, usually you can kind of follow the breadcrumb trail and you could see where a movie's taking you before it goes there. And it's always nice and refreshing for me to see a movie and to experience a story to where it takes some genuine turns that I was not expecting. So I really dug Cobweb. It was almost my number 2. It's basically tied with my number 2, but this one, just because of some of the things that didn't quite completely land for me, the movie ending a little too quickly in the third act, that I decided to knock it down to 3. But this is one to definitely keep your eyes out for. If you can't find it in your local theater, which most of you won't, just keep an eye out for it and check it out when it goes to VOD, because it's worth seeing. Coming in at number 2 is Talk to Me. This was the big hyped horror film of the month, of the past couple of months, really. So many people were talking about this thing. A few people I know saw it in Sundance, like either earlier this year or last year, and so I've heard the name a few times, but here over the past maybe 2 months, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter hyping this thing up as scariest movie of the year, scariest movie in years, scariest movie since Hereditary was the quote that I kept seeing get just shared everywhere. And so I walked into this thing very curious, because A24 and me have a bit of a rocky relationship. Sometimes their creativity and their boldness I really appreciate. Sometimes it's way too out there for me. But Talk to Me was one of their more straightforward horror movies that didn't go too bonkers and too A24. So I really enjoyed this. For somebody that is beyond burnout and just very hard to impress with anything regarding haunting or especially like possession type movies, this is one of the most unique spins on that subgenre that I've seen in a very long time. And I really appreciated that, because like I haven't put out a video on it yet, but I've been saying for a long time that The Exorcist believer, I'm like, I have no faith in this. What is there left to do with The Exorcist? Like, The Exorcist should have never been a franchise, and it's been done to death with movies that aren't titled The Exorcist. And that trailer came out and I'm like, yeah, it's the same shit that we've been seeing for 50 years. So the fact that I said that the same week that I watched this, and I'm like, oh, somebody still can do some different, unique things with these ideas. That's cool. Performances were all great here. You had Sophie Wilde as the lead, and she does a damn good job. And being a character that you really empathize with and you understand her journey. And in a movie like this, to where quite often you can really start yelling at the screen at characters doing some things that are stupid, you at least understand why she's doing them. And that goes a long way with kind of getting through a lot of the cliche, easy script writing. They did dumb shit because horror movie. And then you have another performance in the movie of the little brother, Joe Bird, who is, if you want like the performance that goes through the most physicality, he does really good. And the practical effects paired with his performance when it comes to like the possession and some of the bodily harm that comes along with that is pretty gnarly. I didn't think the movie was all that scary. Like, that's the overhyped part of it, where it's like, guys, calm the fuck down. Quit calling every new horror movie the scariest movie ever. Quit using Hereditary as this benchmark as well, because that's just overplayed. This is more of a like an uneasy movie, like a disturbing type of horror film, to where it just kind of puts you on edge a little bit, but it's not scary. Like, I never jumped. I was never like the big eye thing where you kind of stop breathing because you don't want to blink and miss whatever's going to jump out of the corner. So go in with that expectation, but a great directorial debut by these two YouTubers, which is pretty fucking awesome. But coming in at number 1, which might end up being my favorite movie of the year by the time 2023 comes to a close. We will see. We got quite a few movies to go, and that is Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Say what you will about Tom Cruise, and I've said plenty. The fucking dude delivers when it comes to movies. Like, he knows his audience, and he knows how to deliver what his audience wants. And man, like, if you thought that Top Gun Maverick was like something like saved movies, unfortunately, this one, it's not really necessarily having that in the box office because it's just a really funky year for blockbusters. But as far as just delivering another experience that I go to the theaters that you can only get in the theaters, this is one of those movies of 2023. The Mission Impossible franchise, there's not a bad movie in this entire set here. I mean, Mission Impossible 2 has its faults, but it's still very fun. And this one, I mean, you know how good a franchise is when like the last 6 movies, you could have a healthy debate for any of them about why that's the best of the franchise. And I'm not really going to argue with you too much, but I loved the AI angle. I liked a lot of the new characters that we got here, both on the villain side and the hero side, especially Haley Atwell. She was the standout. I thought that a lot of the stunts and the action was pretty incredible. I kind of wish that they didn't shove that motorcycle jump stunt down our throat for the past year, because that would have been nice to kind of see in its total while I was in the theater, and not behind the scenes footage for a year and then every single trailer and every social media post and every poster. I feel like they kind of blew their wad with that one a little bit. But there's a lot of other great action and stunts and set pieces in the movie, luckily, that make it to where you have a lot more to experience in the theater. Tom Cruise, again, just on a performance level with this character is always good. There's always some new layers, some new things going on, while continuing to kind of build out what we always know about the character. Here, predominantly about him just trying to keep his team alive. And by the end of it, I was so relieved that for a part 1, they actually told a complete story and left me on a satisfying note, to where I can patiently wait for part 2. If part 2 is 3 years from now, I'm good. Whereas we had 2 other movies just this year with Fast X, as well as the significantly better Across the Spider-Verse, that just leave you cold, to just leave you on an absolute cliffhanger out of nowhere. And it's like, thanks for your money. See you in 2 years. And both of those movies just infuriated me with the way that they decided to wrap things up. So I loved this movie. I thought it was awesome. Didn't get a chance to check it out a second time in theaters, but it is one of the movies that I've seen this year that I do look forward to rewatching, and there's not many movies on that list. All right, guys, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of the reviews of my 2023 new releases. I'm also going to put my ranking Mission Impossible stunts up here. If you're a Mission Impossible fan, please help that out. That video struggled, and I don't understand why. I thought it was pretty neat. But like, share, hit that subscribe button, and of course, as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.